Looks like we have a really good list of attendees, and all of our speakers have joined us. We are ready to roll. So thank you for everybody for joining. Thank you everybody for joining our June 4th webinar on e-bicycles and golf carts. We're going to be discussing lots of really great topics today and appreciate all of you joining to facilitate this discussion with us. And we hope that this is a interactive and engaging presentation and discussion. The agenda for today follows such that we're going to just do a brief introduction and welcome of all of our panelists. We're going to then discuss topics by mode, covering both golf carts and low-speed vehicles first. We're going to have really great discussion on how those are being integrated into the transportation system now, as well as a really strong overview of e-bikes and micromobility, the evolving legal environment that we're kind of stepping into as the legislature considers changes to the law, the evolving shared micromobility and the kind of state of play that shared micromobility is in nationally, and then also to have a really great lessons learned and best practices shared from our partners up at Metroplan Orlando. So before we get too into the details, a little bit of housekeeping for everybody. Everyone is going to be muted during the presentation. You should be able to raise your hand as shown in the feature here. You will not be able to do reactions, unfortunately, and I know as much as everyone wants to shoot off fireworks, all that we're going to allow participants to do today is do the raise hand function. But you will be able to submit questions through Q&A. We are going to cover the Q&A by mode. So as we move through the presentation in the webinar, we're going to have our golf cart LSV discussion first, and then we'll shoot into questions for that topic. And then we'll have an overall topic presentation on e-bikes and golf carts. At the end of that discussion, we'll also have Q&A for that mode, but we'll welcome questions from golf carts, of course, before if we want to share those. Lastly, want to make sure that we share that these slides will be posted online at palmbeachmpo.org in full. So you'll be able to view those and look back and refer to them. And we are recording this webinar and we are broadcasting it through YouTube. So you will be able to refer back to the audio and video transcript and recording at a later date if you so choose. I wanted to just take a moment as I see our panelists are getting ready to go, but I do want to acknowledge that we have a few MPO governing board members that have joined us. Councilmember Teach from Village of Palm Springs, as well as Councilmember Drucker, our MPO board chair. I want to appreciate and send some thank you for them for joining as leaders in this program. Of course, we wouldn't all be here today if we didn't have some recent evolving trends in design, implementation, you name it. It seems like people have an opinion about both of these vehicle modes, so golf carts and LSVs and e-bikes. It seems like we're still kind of in this evolving nature and trend around micromobility and alternative vehicles and how we accommodate them as the cost of owning a vehicle goes up and becomes more and more unaffordable. We're going to talk today about new and evolving state legislation and regulations and how those are going to go into play with respect to what we can expect for our law enforcement partners, some of the operational and educational needs for people who are using e-bicycles. We're going to talk about the increasing need to balance mobility, safety, and accessibility to destinations for these modes. So you're going to get a really great overview, especially in the topics related to LSVs on this as accessibility becomes more and more prominent and those vehicles become more widespread in our communities. And then lastly, just cover the importance of consistent educational messaging and enforcement across communities, which is really important to having a safe and fair system that is used by everybody in a very responsible and a very pragmatic and predictable way. I'm going to now introduce our speakers, and I appreciate all of them taking their time out of their busy schedules to make themselves available for this morning's webinar and discussion. First up, Margie Tamblin is our Senior Multimodal Planner at the Palm Beach Metropolitan Planning Organization. She's dedicated to advancing safer, more accessible transportation uses and for all. She oversees the Transportation Alternatives Program, is the liaison to the Vision Zero Action Committee and Transportation Disadvantaged Local Coordinating Board, and is an active member of the Palm Beach County's Micromobility Task Force. She looks forward to continuing the work of addressing micromobility needs across Palm Beach County. Angela Christensen is an associate engineer with Kittleson and Associates, having over 20 years of experience in traffic engineering, operations, and safety with a focus on policy and active transportation. She has previously worked with the Department of Transportation and currently supports several statewide FDOT safety programs, including the Safe Mobility for Life program and the Pedestrian Bicycle Safety Coalition. Angela enjoys the creative problem-solving aspect of transportation engineering, especially finding ways to consider multiple perspectives and working towards solutions that benefit all stakeholders and transportation modes. For our e-bike panel and micromobility panel, we have Nathan George, who is our principal multimodal planner with the Palm Beach Metropolitan Planning Organization, having over 24 years of public and private sector experience in the transportation planning and related fields. He specializes in pedestrian and bicycle planning, multimodal safety, and intersection design. Nathan leverages planning and design and acknowledges user comfort and broad abilities to achieve safer, more comfortable, and connected walking and bicycling environments. Carol Etunez is a Deputy Regional Head of Government Relations for Lime's U.S. South region, who brings more than 7 years of experience in the micromobility industry and over a decade of experience at the intersection of public policy, transportation innovation, and public-private partnerships. Her background spans a wide range of sustainability mobility solutions, including electric moped sharing programs, EV supercharging networks, and shared e-bike, e-scooter systems. Throughout her career, Carol has worked closely with government agencies, stakeholders, and public-private sector partners to advance policies and programs that expand access to safe, equitable, sustainable, transportation solutions. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Mike Wilson. He has been a pedestrian and bicycle planner and analyst for MetroPlan Orlando since 1993, working in the areas of bicycle and pedestrian facility planning, safety education, geographic information systems, and crash analysis, among other efforts. Mike co-founded the Florida Bicycle Association and American Bicycling Association Education Association. He is the co-developer of Cycling Savvy, traffic cycling safety curriculum. Thank you to all of our speakers. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist. Give me one moment as I give remote control to Margie. And Margie, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Margie Tamman, and I'm here today to give a brief statutory overview of golf carts and low-speed vehicles. Bear with me for a second. I think this is a little slower than I thought it was going to be. All right, perfect. So the golf cart statute for the state of Florida is 316.212, and golf carts may be operated only upon the following that have been designated and vetted for use by a local entity. So those include a county road and a municipal street, and those should be indicated with signage. And counties and municipalities are required to determine that golf carts may safely travel on the roads or streets that they allow a golf cart to be on, considering their speed, volume, and the character of the motor vehicle traffic along the roadway. Golf carts may only be operated on certain parts of the state highway system, and those parts include to cross a section of the road that intersects a road or street that has been designated for golf cart use, and then to also cross mid-block to reach a golf course. And those all need to be vetted by the state of Florida. And to give you a brief idea of some of the required equipment, as well as when golf carts may be operated, they may only be operated during sunrise or between sunrise and sunset, although local governments may provide permission or permit operation between sunset and sunrise with the some added vehicle features. And some of those features include, for riding at night, a golf cart, headlights, brake lights, turn signals, and a windshield. Golf carts may not be operated on public roads or streets by a person who is under the age of 18 unless he or she possesses a valid learner's permit or a driver's license. Golf carts may not be operated by an individual who is 18 years or older unless that individual possesses a government-issued photo ID. And then on the right, you can see some of the required materials or equipment for riding during the day. And that includes efficient brakes, reliable steering apparatus, safe tires, a rear view mirror, and red reflectorized warning devices in both the front and rear of the vehicle. And regarding low-speed vehicles may be operated only on streets where the posted speed limit is 35 miles per hour or less. And that is not to preclude people from crossing in a low-speed vehicle on a roadway that has a posted speed limit of more than 35 miles per hour. But that's just crossing, not riding on those streets. These vehicles must be registered and insured in accordance with Florida Statute 320.02 and titled pursuant to Statute 319. Operators are required to have a valid driver's license for riding in this vehicle. Low-speed vehicle statutes continued. They may be operated, And to give you a brief idea of what is required for this, it's a little bit different. Although golf carts and low-speed vehicles appear similar, they are not the same. You can see that there's seat belts that are required, there's brake lights that are required, turn signals, headlights, windshields, things of that nature that are also required for this type of vehicle that are not required for a golf cart, at least during the day. And some quick takeaways for local government. I feel like we're at a really good time in kind of the precipice of golf cart use. It's not as widespread necessarily as e-bikes just yet, but local route regulation and designation matters at this moment in time. I think we have a really good opportunity to work across the county and municipalities to designate routes where golf carts are allowed and to make sure that they're signed appropriately, and to work on parking where golf carts can be. Things of that nature are also important. And regarding equipment, so golf carts can be modified to become a low-speed vehicle. And in order to become a low-speed vehicle with speed and whatnot, we also need to make sure that we have all the required equipment for those vehicles. So whether it be a rear view mirror, lights, appropriate lights for it, reflectors, things of that nature, we also need to make sure that our constituents are aware that we need to have everything, all the equipment must conform in order to not face citations or fines. And bikeways and golf cart shared use paths have similar design needs. So typically these design details are varied and can range from 12 feet to 16 feet and can be even wider to accommodate for a variety of multimodal devices. Low-speed vehicles typically can go up to 25 miles per hour, and we want to make sure that we have enough space for all users, whether it's someone that's riding an e-bike, walking, cycling, things of that nature. So we encourage you to look to the villages if you'd like for their best practices and their designs, because that's typically the place that we initially think of when we think of golf carts in the state of Florida. But we also encourage that you reach out to your local engineer for more information and some advice on how to design good bikeways and golf cart shared use pathways. And just to give you another idea of what things look like in the villages, you can see two shared use paths here. They're pretty extensive and wide, and they accommodate a variety of different modes. You can just see a low-speed vehicle there on the left, and you also will see a sort of like a median or chicane, if you'd like to call that a chicane, but it has some vegetation in there to create some space between the different flows of traffic heading one direction or the other. So that will give you an idea of that. And thank you so much again for your time. And I'll pass things over to Angela Christensen from Safe Mobility for Life Coalition to discuss some more about golf carts and low-speed vehicles.
Yep, I'm Angela, and I provide consultant support to the Florida Department of Transportation's Safe Mobility for Life program. I work with Margie on the Livable Communities team of that coalition, and I'm actually here today on behalf of Gail Hawley, who is the Safe Mobility for Life program manager at the Florida Department of Transportation in Tallahassee. So today I'll tell you a little bit about the program itself. I'll share some data related to golf carts and low-speed vehicles. And then we'll walk through some of the digital resources that were recently created to educate the public on these devices. All right, let's see. Here we go, thanks. So we'll start with a little bit of information about the program itself. FDOT established the Safe Mobility for Life program in 2004, really to address the needs of aging Floridians. We know that the demographics in our state are steadily shifting older. We also know that changes in health, vision, and reflexes can affect our driving as early as age 55. So we can see on the screen here that, by 2030, 1 in 4 Florida residents will be over the age of 65, and 2030 is right around the corner. We also know that nearly 3/4 of Floridians have shared in survey feedback that these are 3 out of 4 surveyed Floridians over the age of 50 have shared that they feel they'd lose their sense of freedom if they stop driving. And so because of those, we can't stop moving forward in time. And because of that, Safe Mobility for Life has implemented a proactive and research-based program to develop some resources to support older adults in maintaining their safe mobility and independence, even beyond driving years. So I've mentioned older adults. And when we talk about older adults, we're talking about people who are 50 or older, but really with a special focus on ages 65 and older. This includes all modes, right? So people who are walking, biking, driving, riding transit, motorcycles, and operating golf carts and low-speed vehicles. A little bit about the program itself. It has a strategic plan that supports some other statewide plans that you may or may not be familiar with. That includes the Florida Transportation Plan, FDOT's Strategic Highway Safety Plan, Florida's statewide plan on aging. Also, the program partners with AARP's Livable Communities and has contributed to the FHWA handbook on designing roadways for the aging population. There is a diverse coalition of folks from across the state that work together to focus on some areas that you can see at the bottom of the screen here, from the education side, from enforcement. There's a team that promotes livable communities, mobility independence, and then prevention and assessment. I'll note also that the program has a running list that they identify each year of 20 priority counties across the state. And those are split into 10 counties that are in urban areas and 10 in rural. Those are based on population and crash data, looking at where crashes involving older adults are overrepresented compared to the county's 65 plus population. I mentioned that because Palm Beach County is a priority county for Safe Mobility for Life. And I mentioned that there is a coalition. It's made up of many partners, including Palm Beach MPO. The coalition has one goal, and that's to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries for Florida's aging population while maintaining safe mobility and connection to the community. So both of those focused on the prevention side of the crashes, but also the connection with the community. And really with this coalition, collaboration is key with all of the coalition partners. These teams are working together to implement strategies toward that goal that's on the top of the screen. And one of these strategies is centered around education. So today I'm here to tell you a little bit about our approach to education around golf carts and low-speed vehicles. We know that we are seeing golf carts and low-speed vehicles more and more in our communities. They're on our paths, our roadways, they're in our parking lots, sometimes on our sidewalks. People of all ages are using golf carts and low-speed vehicles for transportation. I think Brian alluded to it a little bit at the top of why people are shifting and starting to use these more and more. And as Margie described, there are different laws for people who are operating golf carts versus low-speed vehicles, where and when they can be operated, plus the licensing requirements. Most folks know that in 2023, Florida adopted a new requirement that golf cart drivers must have a driver's license if they're under the age of 18 or carry photo ID if they're over the age of 18, if they're operating on a roadway or a designated space. And so at that time, the Safe Mobility for Life program updated their golf cart brochure. That's what's shown here on the left. And really use the data that the program had available to use some targeted outreach. So looking at municipalities that had golf cart ordinances, including Palm Beach County at that time. And so last year, we actually heard that some communities were starting to see some challenges and have some confusion around golf carts and low-speed vehicles. And so we really wanted to understand that problem. So we started by asking about the challenges in communities, and a few themes emerged. We heard about the equipment. Golf carts and low-speed vehicles look very similar. We also have heard that a golf cart can be converted to a low-speed vehicle, so understanding what those differences are. the statutes on the licensing requirements. Who needs to have a driver's license if they're operating a golf cart or low-speed vehicle? Where can these be operated? Are they all allowed on roadways, or do they have to be in designated spaces? There's a lot of language around where you can cross, where you can't cross. We heard from our enforcement partners that the brochure was actually overwhelmingly positively received. They were very helpful with when locally shared. And we also heard that the table that compared, the golf carts and low-speed vehicles on the left was super helpful in just explaining those two. So we considered supplementing the brochure. We knew that we wanted something very visual that could be easily shared through multiple channels. And we wanted to be able to call out the different features on golf carts versus low-speed vehicles, kind of as a starting place to understand which is which and what are you operating, so you know which rules to follow. So I'll walk through some of the data and the process that we looked into. We worked with our enforcement partners to review data on where citations have been issued. So the UTC is for citations, like a ticket for golf carts and low-speed vehicles across the state. We also looked at available crash information involving golf carts and low-speed vehicles. We then reviewed FDOT's eTraffic, which is a GIS map-based resource available, publicly available, but it has a layer for golf cart communities to understand where golf carts have been designated, or communities that have designated themselves as golf cart communities. So we really wanted to be able to use all of this information together to do some targeted outreach after some educational materials have been created. And this process really aligns with Safe Mobility for Life's approach to implementing human factors research. So we'll start with the citations. We learned from our enforcement partners where citations are issued to someone who's operating a golf cart or low-speed vehicle. These are aggregated at the county level. And so citations are things like not having the proper equipment, or operating on a roadway where your device is not allowed. Maybe not having the right licensing or registration or insurance on your low-speed vehicle because of whatever number of reasons. So you can see on the screen on the left side, we looked at the general population, so all ages. And then on the right, narrowed in and focused on people who are age 65 and older to see if that tells a different story, specifically for this program, to focus on the challenges that people are having at different ages. And I'll note that these were all normalized per number of licensed drivers. So it's per 10,000 licensed drivers. Next, we looked at golf cart crashes per 10,000 licensed drivers. So you might have noticed in the previous slide, Palm Beach County was the lightest shade of blue, not a ton of citations compared to some of the other counties across the state. Here, Palm Beach County is not the lightest shade of blue. It's kind of creeping up. It's also not the darkest. But this is where golf cart crashes are occurring. I will note that this data analysis was based on Signal 4 analytics. So typically those tend to include crashes that involve a motor vehicle. It might not, we might not report all of the crashes involving golf carts or low-speed vehicles. If, say, there was a single golf cart on a sidewalk that crashed into a fixed object, that may not be reported in this data. This tends to be those involving a vehicle. But then we looked at the just total number of crashes. This is not normalized by the number of licensed drivers. And we see both in all ages and then also in the 65 plus group that Palm Beach County is in the top 3. So the good news is there's potential for significant change here, and hopefully, sharing these resources with you today can provide some information that may be helpful to you in your communities. So now that we've seen the data, let's look at the materials available for education. We took the data, we took the feedback that we heard from folks, and with that in mind, we started creating some visuals. we quickly learned that we can't do everything in one graphic, and so we wanted to split things out so that it's easier to digest. And so first we started with the equipment. We wanted to clearly identify the required equipment for golf carts and low-speed vehicles, especially since the rules are different for each device. So it's really helpful to understand those subtle differences. So you can see on here, the maximum speed for golf carts is 20 miles an hour versus the maximum speed on a low-speed vehicle is 25. And then pulled out the golf cart requirements for equipment for daytime versus nighttime. I learned during this process that statutes say you can't operate a golf cart after sunset unless your agency says it's okay and you have this extra equipment. So we pulled that out. In addition to the daytime equipment, you've also got to have some turn signals, brake lights. And then on the low-speed vehicle side, calling out some of the specific items, including we wanted to make sure that the license plate is on there. It kind of falls in the licensing and registration side. It's on the registration side, but it's equipment that you need to have. So it's something visual that you should have on your low-speed vehicle if you're operating it in a public location. We also know that golf carts can be converted to low-speed vehicles. So and that would happen through a process with the Florida Department of Highway and Motor Safety, and Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, excuse me, and implementing all of these additional equipment requirements to upgrade the vehicle. Next, we wanted to do that comparison of the licensing and registration requirements. So for a golf cart, being very clear about if you're under 18, you need to have a driver's license or a permit. People who are 18 and older need to have a valid photo ID with them. Versus if you're operating a low-speed vehicle, everybody's got to have a driver's license, regardless of how old you are. And then, the additional requirement for low-speed vehicles to have that title, registration, and insurance. And then we also wanted to talk about where these can be operated. Some of the most common citations that we've seen were related to where the devices are operated and driven. So we created 2 separate graphics covering the rules of where golf carts can be driven and also where low-speed vehicles can be driven. You might notice some trends if you read this, on local roads that are specifically designated for golf cart use, at crossings specifically designated and marked, in state parks and mobile home communities where allowed. So a lot of this comes to having that discussion at the local level where golf carts will be permitted. Versus low-speed vehicles, a little bit more broadly allowed on any local roads with a speed limit of 35 miles an hour or less. And then vehicle registration and equipment are required on all public roads. So when we created these, they were really focused on the transportation use of golf carts and low-speed vehicles versus traditional driving on a golf course or someone using their low-speed vehicle on private property. And lastly, we created some general safety tips to remind users to share the road, comply with traffic control devices, and really avoid impaired driving. Some people may have a different mindset when operating, behind the wheel of a golf cart or a low-speed vehicle versus behind the wheel of a motor vehicle. So really we want to remind folks that the same rules of the road apply. You got to stop at stop signs. You need to follow markings, the same as you would behind the wheel of any other motor vehicle. I'll mention that all of these graphics have gone through the review process at FDOT. They've been approved and they will be available for free online download very soon. And before we wrap up, I'll share a couple other educational materials that are available from the Safe Mobility for Life program. I'll mention, we talked a little bit about the educational materials today, but there's also a regular newsletter. There are in-person workshops. There's a CarFit program that really helps aging drivers improve the fit of their vehicle for safety and comfort, helping adjust the mirrors, the seat, steering wheel position so that drivers can see well out of their vehicle. There's access to all of the data that has been used in decision making through the program. There's information on road and safety countermeasures. There's a community partner program to connect and get all of, be connected to the program. And then online, there is, online, but also available for order. There are several printed materials. We know that older adults tend to prefer sometimes having something in hand. So having printed materials has been very beneficial through this program. So there are these free resources and educational materials to help everyone make transportation decisions and plan their transportation future. They tend to be, really clear, easy to read and follow the human factors guidelines that went into the research behind this program. I'll mention that the program's really produced dozens of printed materials over the years that they use in targeted outreach. This includes the new guide that you see in the top left of the screen, the Guide to Safe Mobility. There's information about silver alerts, tips for family and caregivers. There's information on Find a Ride Florida and how to use transportation network companies like Lyft and Uber. And of course, golf carts. I'll also note that many of these are available in Spanish and Creole. So there are translated materials available if you, you may want to consider these if you have a new flashing yellow arrow or a roundabout in your community, or there's a community that predominantly speaks another language. These have been translated over. Also information about wrong way driving. So these are all available for order and online. There is a QR code on the screen and a link at the bottom where you can access all of this material. And then I'll also share that there are free digital resources online that can be downloaded. You can use these as part of your own education and outreach efforts. If you've got flashing yellow arrows, how to use roundabouts, rectangular rapid flashing beacons, right turns on red. There's information on wrong way driving. A lot of these are GIFs, so they're animated when you download them. You can use them in social media. There's also information on mid-block pedestrian crossings, parking lot safety, and some general traffic safety laws, like where to walk when there's no sidewalk, or using the 3-foot law when passing somebody who's on a bike, and also what to do if you're involved in a crash. And then lastly, I'll share the Insider newsletter, which comes out regularly. There tends to be some more in-depth articles on transportation topics and resources. So you can see on the screen, the next issue has education on diverging diamond interchanges. We had heard there's interest in, we're having more of these constructed across the state. There's interest in educating people on how they work, how to use them as a driver or, as in any other mode. I will mention that all of the materials that I've shared today, golf carts included, have been developed for an audience of older adults, but really the information in all of them is beneficial to people of all ages. So it's not that just limited to the 25% of our population statewide that is over age 65. So this is available for anyone to use in their communities. You can take these and reuse them. You can adapt them if you'd like, and really just share with the communities in your area. So as we wrap up, I will share that the digital golf cart graphics will be available for download on the Safe Mobility for Life website. You can use them in your safety campaigns or newsletters. Margie also offered to notify attendees when they go live on the website. You are welcome to use this QR code to access the current golf cart materials. That's the golf cart brochure. It'll take you straight there. And I've also included Gail Hawley's contact information on the screen. You can reach out to her if you are interested in more information about the program or getting involved. If you reach out to Gail today, Just tell her happy birthday. That's why she's not here and I'm here in her place. But with that, we have time for questions. Are there any in the chat?
So while we get questions plugged in, while we get people ready to raise their hand, I'm going to just ask kind of a leading question for you, Angela. Both you and Margie had information related to Lake and Sumter County. And for those of you who do not know, that's the location of the villages. It's kind of shared between those areas, but it didn't pop up when it came to crashes or citations as being the hotspots. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on those areas. What are they doing differently? Is it just because there's a sheer safety and numbers component to it, or is it because, as Margie alluded to, they're designing safe separated facilities, or is all of the material going to the villages and being distributed there, Angela? If you could give us some insights, maybe that would be helpful.
That's a great question, and I can pull those slides back up. I know that Sumter was a hotspot on the crashes. So you're mentioning that Sumter's here as far as total crashes. They're listed number 1 and both all ages, and then also for 65 plus. And you can kind of see there's actually, unfortunately, a pretty big jump when we look at the difference between number 1 and then 2 and 3. Lake and Marion, it's kind of like that Sumter, Lake, Marion. The 3 counties are the villages kind of spread across the 3 counties in that area. So they do show up in the top 5, and that's total. And then when you look at sorry, I'm not sure if I had done that. When we look at the rate, when we take it by licensed drivers, Sumter's still at the top, and then Lake is a couple further down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's they're pretty clearly high on the overall number. Normalized, it I think makes a difference. Do you think that they're doing anything particular on their education or their design side of things, or engineering?
That's a great question. I'm not as familiar with many of the specifics, but I do know that there are some designated spaces for golf carts. Right, so they have some paths that have been designated for golf cart use. I have heard anecdotally, I have not gone to visit, but there are some parking spaces. Like some people may use their golf cart as their main mode of transportation to go to the grocery store. And so they've accommodated that by creating golf cart parking at the grocery store. And maybe having that designated space that's separated from motor vehicles has been helpful, but it's kind of, I'm conjecturing, I guess, at this point, and guessing as to what has contributed to the differences there. Margie, do you have input?
I do not, but I have 2 questions. I was keeping eyes on the Q&A box. So there's one comment, more or less, from Tom Lanahan. And he said, I would like to suggest adding a reminder to the presentation that LSV drivers are at risk of getting a DUI if they do drive impaired. And I think that's a good suggestion. So thank you for that, Tom. And then Kathy Wall also mentioned any recommendations on how to increase awareness for parents and caregivers regarding underage driving use of their children and use of unrestrained children and use of car seats. So I guess that's more about car seats, unrestrained children on golf carts, things of that nature. So an increasing awareness for them. And I don't know if you want to go first, Angela, or I can.
I don't know if there have been other efforts statewide. So a lot of this research happened under the Safe Mobility for Life program that's focused more on the older population. And so I'm curious if like the Teen Safe Driver Coalition has tackled this question about the golf carts and the licensing requirements. I don't know specifically if there are resources yet about the educating of parents.
Yeah, and I would also add, I think that getting the educational materials into schools or to parents from schools, especially if your communities seem to have an issue locally, because I don't think that anybody wants to have to get a call from law enforcement from, to a parent that basically says, hey, we have your kid was driving a a golf cart or an LSV down a public street, and unfortunately, they have to, take some form of actions, and that I don't think is something anybody wants to do. So whatever, partners can do locally to get the information out through your encouragement and your education campaigns locally would be welcomed. And then beyond that, since we have a little bit more time, we have some facilitated Q&A as well. So Angela, do you want to read off the question first? I'll respond, and then maybe if some of the people attending want to raise their hand, we can allow people to talk as well if they would like to respond to them too.
Sure. Yeah. And Margie and I were chatting as we prepared, and we're curious how you and your community have been handling golf carts and low speed vehicles locally.
Sure. And I think that this has definitely been something that's come up a few times at our MPO governing board meeting. It's come up with local conversations and local law enforcement on our community traffic safety team. So first and foremost, I'd recommend reaching out to your local FDOT community traffic safety team liaison. I know that there's some statewide partners that are on here. We're in District 4. Courtney Cannon is with the DOT community traffic safety team here locally. These conversations have trickled into those areas as well, and it's good to have a coordinated law enforcement and education approach through law enforcement to getting these things put into place. But also beyond that, I think it's important to acknowledge that these are kind of first mile, last mile type vehicles, and then also expanding that range to a few miles. I wouldn't suggest that people are going very far in a golf cart, but maybe they're going a little bit farther in a low speed vehicle. So even on the picture here, you notice that two vehicles can fit side by side. So I think that we can start thinking about design standards. And some communities have actually put in golf cart parking to maximize and centralize where carts are going, or low speed vehicles are being parked. And that's important to recognize because the third vehicle here is actually blocking a clear parking path for someone who would be an ADA driver. That may need to load or unload in a wheelchair, and that would be their direct access to the ramp, which we do not want to do. So I think as much as communities can prepare for their inclusion of these, especially at more urbanized locations to facilitate better use of the urban environment, that would be welcomed.
I would also say that there's a lot of local communities that have some issues with golf carts, or maybe you're experiencing an influx in golf carts, and maybe it's a good idea if you're thinking of planning for golf carts in your community, reaching out to those municipalities who already have an influx of golf carts.
Thank you. And Angela, just to make a note, Tom also mentioned it would be good to talk to the Florida Police Chiefs Association and Sheriff's Association. Thank you for those comments, Tom. Another question that just came in, and we're going to try to answer audience questions. Yes, we are going to answer we are going to have these presentations downloadable online, so we are going to include that as well. We're going to have time for one more question from Angela for Margie and I and anybody else who wants to chime in. As a reminder, you can raise your hands and respond. I don't see any at the moment, but we will make sure that we get to you if you do. So Angela, one more. Which would you prefer?
Yeah, how are you handling questions from the public? And maybe I'll make it a twofer. How are you addressing the questions that are coming up around them? And are you partnering with someone to promote safety for golf carts and low speed vehicles?
I would certainly go back to the answer previously just about the community traffic safety team being a critical partner, because we reach practically every law enforcement agency through that body. So if you can find a way to become a part of that, that agency or that community traffic safety team that we attend in District 4 also has lively discussions about e-bikes and micromobility as well. We do frequently kind of evaluate and research and monitor the law enforcement or local community ordinances that are passed by communities. We have a tracking table which actually relates to LSVs, golf carts, micromobility, and e-bikes that was started by the Department of Transportation through Courtney, and we update that at the MPO every couple of months as we see new things coming in. So that is how we are directly addressing questions about golf carts. We're trying to get our law enforcement engaged and responsive to local communities, because as an MPO, we don't own and operate facilities. We don't enforce anything, but we are a very strong encouragement, a very strong educational partner to our local municipalities in our county. Okay. Well, thank you, Angela. Thank you, Margie. I'm going to get us transitioned over to our e-bikes and the micromobility update. So let me make sure I give control to Mr. Nathan George, and we'll get that ready to roll. So Nathan, you should have control of the screen. You're on mute. There you go.
There we go. All right. So as we transition, want to just emphasize that we wanted to, we here at the MPO wanted to have a conversation and really frame this conversation around policy up front, because there's a lot of activity in this area. So we first wanted to acknowledge some of the policy changes that have been proposed and are upcoming here in the state of Florida, and the responses that a lot of communities have had to dealing with e-bikes in their communities. But this proves to be a very elusive challenge, and you're going to see more from Mike a little bit later about the specifics of the policy recommendations. I'm going to focus initially just on the more specific discussion that is related to how we need to approach e-bikes and micromobility more broadly, and not so much on what's been proposed currently. And that will make a little more sense in just a moment. But the main thing that we have to understand is that the state has currently pending legislation, Senate Bill 382, that proposes policy changes in the e-bike and micromobility area. That's currently unsigned, and we understand that at some point when that law takes effect, it will change the law in the state of Florida. But it also includes creation of a micromobility safety task force, and that's going to recommend additional policy changes, so new changes to state law that will be taken up in future legislative sessions. So this is not a conversation that ends today. It's something that's going to continue. And then here locally in Palm Beach County, the Palm Beach County Criminal Justice Commission has a draft ordinance in development that will have local policy related to e-bikes and micromobility. But everybody will be navigating the same environment. The state legislature is going to make changes, and we'll all have to adapt in the future. So this is a conversation that's going to continue to evolve. It's not something that ends here today. And we want to build the conversation around where we stand currently. And hopefully we'll have some constructive thoughts to share with you today. Just trying to there we go. All right, so first up, want to make an acknowledgement, because as I alluded to, this conversation tends to be elusive. We talk about e-bikes and then somebody brings up a different device, something that's overpowered, and it's not actually an e-bike. And so we continually have to reground the conversation. Are we talking about an e-bike, or are we talking about something else? The Florida Bicycle Association came out with a statement. I've included an excerpt here that I'll read for you. We support clear, enforceable definitions that help riders, families, and law enforcement understand where different devices belong and how they should operate. And so a lot of times when we have these conversations, we're not actually talking about an e-bike. We're not talking about a micromobility device, because the challenges that people see kids riding on overpowered e-motos or electric motorcycles, it's not actually something that's covered by these definitions. And so we need to acknowledge that in our conversations. Here at the MPO, we're also focused on the other side of what Brian mentioned earlier. It's much cheaper to buy these devices, but at the MPO, we're thinking about how do we reorient our transportation environment to serve everybody. And we acknowledge that we can't continually widen roads and take people's homes and front yards to make streets wider so people can drive in cars. There are more efficient ways that we can move around. We can use transit, so that's one opportunity. But broadly in the public, it's understood that these lesser expensive or inexpensive devices that you can buy and transport yourself don't take a lot of space. They're very adaptable. So it's a very efficient way to get around. And so we support trying to get people around safely, but we need to make sure that we have this broader conversation around how do we reorient the environment and provide that safety for everybody who's traveling. We're working on a pedestrian and bicycle safety study here that really highlights some of the challenges we're facing. So we do see an increase in crashes, and it has a disproportionate share of folks who are killed or severely injured. So the trend lines are increasing as folks are riding on e-bikes or other devices. And so that's something that we're continuing to monitor. So fortunately, we're seeing fairly level fatal statistics, but that really means that people are safer as they travel in cars, and we're continuing to see folks who are killed while they're riding or walking. So anybody who's not a vehicular occupant. So those are trends that are somewhat alarming nationwide, and we're continuing to focus on improving safety and how can we change the environment so it can accommodate these new devices. And my slides keep advancing on me. My last slide, just to continue to ground the conversation and remind us that we are here to talk about e-bikes. We acknowledge that there are other devices that are not e-bikes or not micromobility. And so it's important as you have conversations around these devices to acknowledge what it is that makes those devices legal and what's not. So Florida statute has an exemption criteria. So basically, if you're on a device that meets certain criteria based on the speed that that device can go, no more than 28 miles per hour, or the power that that device has, which is the equivalent of 750 watts, those devices do not require you to operate with a driver's license. They are not required to be registered because they meet that criteria. They're exempt from those requirements. So when you see those devices that are overpowered, the e-motorcycles, the electric scooters that are capable of 30 miles an hour plus, and many of these vehicles are approaching 50 miles an hour, and they're still marketed as e-bikes and legal. They're not street legal. They require registration. You must have the appropriate equipment, turn signals, lights, and you need to have a license. So that's the end of the policy conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Carol, who's going to talk about shared micromobility, and then Mike will close out this discussion talking more broadly about their observations in their e-white paper. So Carol, take us away.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Great.
Yes, we can.
I'm trying to go to the next slide. 1 second. But good morning, everyone. My name is Carol Antunes. I lead government affairs and community engagement for Lime across the U.S. South. I've had the pleasure of working with Lime for about 2 years, but I've been in the micromobility industry since 2020. That may not sound like a very long time, but in an industry that's constantly evolving, I've seen a lot in a relatively short amount of time. Over the years, I've worked with a wide range of shared mobility devices, from electric mopeds to e-bikes and e-scooters, and have had the opportunity to work with communities on everything from pilot programs to policy development to safety initiatives and system expansions. I'm based in Coconut Creek in Broward County, so I'm especially glad to be here with many of you neighbors, and I appreciate the opportunity to share Lime's perspective and learn from all of you as we continue working towards, say, more connected and accessible transportation options. I'm gonna do a brief intro on Lime. Globally, we have facilitated over 1 billion micromobility trips across 5 continents and over 30 countries. In the state of Florida, we partners with communities like St. Petersburg, Tampa, Orlando, Orange County, Jacksonville, as well as the Mayo Clinic campus. One of the benefits of operating at this scale is that we get to see how different communities are approaching many of the same challenges that we're discussing today. Things like how to improve safety, how to integrate new mobility options into the existing transportation system, and how to create clear expectation for riders. Florida has actually done important work in establishing clear definitions and operating frameworks for e-bikes and scooters. Increasingly, many of the policy conversations that we are having are focused on newer vehicle types, like we just mentioned, that are higher speeds, like e-motos. As those conversations continue, it's important that we don't treat all electric mobility devices the same. Different vehicle types have different operating characteristics. They have different use cases and different policy considerations. From a operator perspective, one of the biggest lessons we've learned is like clear definitions, consistent expectations, and strong partnerships create better outcomes for riders or operators and communities alike. Before I continue, I want to spend a moment defining the types of vehicles that I will be referring to throughout the discussion. At Lime, we operate both stand-up scooters and seated scooters, as well as Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes. We deploy different combinations of these devices across communities across Florida. It really just depends on the local transportation needs of each of the specific communities that we serve. I think it's an important distinction because many of the policy conversations that we're having today are increasingly focused on those newer and often higher speed vehicle types that are entering the market. The vehicles that we own and operate they serve different trip purposes, but they share a common goal, and that's providing practical options for short distance, first and last mile connections, and just really everyday transportation. With that context, I want to talk about what makes shared systems different than privately owned devices. One thing that's truly unique about shared micromobility is that cities have management tools that are available that simply just don't exist with private owned vehicles. Shared systems operate under permits and performance requirements established by local government. The operators are held accountable to those requirements and are in regular communication with agency staff, especially as issues arise. The technology also gives cities additional tools to support local goals. We have things like geofencing, which allow us to control slow speed zones, no ride zones, and have true control over parking arrangements. And all of this can be managed and customized for local municipalities based on need. That's not to say that technology alone will replace the impact of infrastructure, education, and enforcement, but it does create an opportunity for municipalities and operators to work together in a way that is not truly possible for privately owned vehicles. Ultimately, shared micromobility is more than just about the vehicle. It's a managed transportation service that can be adapted for local policy and safety objectives. From our perspective, when it comes to the most successful programs, they tend to have three things in common. Strong partnerships is probably the key. The best outcomes truly happen with agencies and operators communicate regularly and work collaboratively to solve challenges. Second, it's really about consistent rules. So clear expectations make it easier for the rider to understand how and where they should operate, and they also make compliance easier to achieve. And lastly, strategic alignment. So safety outcomes improve when policy, the infrastructure, operations, and education are all working in tandem towards the same goal rather than operating independently. No single element solves every challenge, but together they create a foundation for what is long-term success. And I will leave you with a final thought. Shared micromobility is no longer a new concept. We've been around at Lime for about a decade now. And over that past decade, cities and operators have learned a tremendous amount about what contributes to safe and effective programs. There are a ton of established best practices around things like vehicle classifications, speed management, rider education, the technology tools that we use, as well as the operating requirements for these permits and contracts. From our perspective, one of the biggest opportunities is applying those best practices consistently. Clear and predictable rules help riders truly understand expectations, they support compliance, and allow agencies and operators to focus on improving outcomes rather than just navigating uncertainty. And ultimately, the goal is not to simply allow micromobility. The goal is to make it safe, predictable, and to integrate it into the broader transportation system and network. So with that, I leave you and I thank you and I look forward to the discussions and questions.
Thank you, Carol. I'm going to get Mike transitioned in here as the speaker. And Mike, you should have control. Take us away.
Thank you, Brian. And yeah, Brian mentioned, my planning and education background, but I also want to mention that I've been a transportation cyclist literally since 1970, and a lot of the real world experience informs what I do as a planner and analyst. Also, just want to mention that there's probably a good bit of overlap in my presentation with what Nathan and Carol presented, so I'll try to breeze through that in the interest of time. So at MetroPlan Orlando, we recently finished our Vision Zero plan, and we did a white paper as part of that to address the issues of micromobility, specifically the safety side of things. And so that's sort of been the basis for our for moving forward. And some of the findings from that white paper will be noted in here. So basically, overall, what I'm going to be talking about this morning is, what is it? Why are we here? How do we adapt, both from a policy standpoint and from the infrastructure and programs are very important. And then where we go from here. So micromobility, it's really any sort of small electric device. You see up to 3 feet in width, 50 pounds or less. These are very, very general because it's such an evolving market, and typically low speed, under 30 miles per hour. Lightweight local transportation. And I want to dive into the e-bikes and some of the definitions there. Statutorily in Florida, so if it's a bicycle or tricycle and has an electric motor, it has to have fully operable pedals, has to have a seat or a saddle, and as mentioned before, motor less than 750 watts. And then within that, we get the 3 classes of e-bike, which is starting off with class 1, where you have to pedal to activate the motor, and the motor is limited to 20 miles per hour. These vehicles can operate anywhere that a regular bicycle can operate. And that's really true for all of the e-bikes. The next type is the class 2, where it can go up to 20 miles per hour, but does not require pedaling to engage the motor. You can just go by throttle. And once again, can operate everywhere that a bicycle can. And then we have class 3, which it's back to requiring pedal assist to activate the motor, but up to 28 miles per hour. And again, operating all the same locations. For none of these, there's no minimum age requirement, but there's a helmet requirement for all riders under 16, just as there is for a regular bicycle. Then we get to the electric scooter. Scooters don't have seats or saddles, and they don't have pedals, but they are allowed up to 28 miles per hour, much like the class 3. And again, same types of locations where they can operate, and same lack of limitation when it comes to age, and same helmet requirements. Very briefly on the e-motos that Nathan got into, basically, if it doesn't have working pedals, it's got a motor over 750 watts. If it goes more than 28 miles per hour, then it is not an e-bike, right? It's either a motorcycle or a moped, and depending on the circumstances, may require a driver's license, and in many cases may not be street legal at all. No surprise, we're seeing a big increase in use of these devices. Look at the sales numbers on the chart on the right; they're really skyrocketing. As Carol was alluding to, the fleet vehicles have been around for quite some time, but in the past 5 years is when we've really seen the huge increase in personal ownership of these devices. They're now being sold, online and number of locations beyond regular bike shops. You can go to Best Buy, for example. And so over a million of these were sold. That's back in 2022. I'm sure it's a good bit higher than that now. When we look at the shared trips, you can see the breakdown here of majority are docked facilities for the more urban bike share programs, and a smaller number of the undocked, and then a number of remainder with scooters. And you see kind of a almost even split between pedal bikes and e-bikes. But what we're starting to see now with the affordability of these is a lot of replacement of last mile connections. In my own neighborhood, I look out my office window and see the kids going to school on e-scooters, e-bikes, and many of them probably would have been driven to school. So there's a plus side there, and of course we're not producing the emissions with these vehicles, and it's just a much lower point of entry, right? Because you don't need a driver's license. So why are we here? There's no mystery that we're seeing a big increase in injuries. They've doubled each year from 2017 to 22. E-scooter injuries are up 45% over that period. And again, these are overall injuries, and irrespective of whether a motor vehicle was involved. We see children under 14 accounting for 34% of the injuries. Excuse me, but that's not what we see in the crashes involving motor vehicles. That's stayed very much the same as far as the proportion of bike/e-bike crashes that involve younger children. At least that's what I'm seeing it in our metro area, looking at Signal 4 data. But because of this, and both the real and some of the perceived problems, we're seeing a big demand for law enforcement and emergency response. I like to say that the law can tell you what you must do and what you must not do, but it can't tell you what you should do. That gets into the realm of education, defensive driving, and then of course the issue of infrastructure is, can our infrastructure handle these devices? That they're much significantly faster than, and I guess by infrastructure, specific infrastructure. What's the best way to accommodate them, given a certain context? It's been all over the news. Again, don't need to belabor this, but the number of serious injuries increasing, and again, a big portion of that, actually, the majority of injuries do not involve a motor vehicle. So that speaks to training for users so that they don't get into trouble just operating the vehicle itself in its environment, irrespective of motor vehicles. When you add speed, to any vehicle, it requires increased awareness, increased more operating space, especially braking distance, and communication needs to be much more assertive and proactive. You can't count on something like eye contact when you're talking about these moving at 20 miles per hour. And motorists often misjudge the speed of faster cyclists. That's always been the case before e-bikes, that faster cyclists often get into more trouble, not because of overtaking drivers, but because the drivers pulling into them, misjudging their approaching speed. And even before all of this increase in e-mobility, e-micromobility, we were doing some analysis on bike crashes where we actually got exposure data. We put video cameras out, and we were able to count cyclists by their position on the road, whether they were in travel lane, a bike lane, or sidewalk, and also their direction relative to traffic, regular traffic movement. And so this chart here shows the importance of cyclist speed as a risk factor. So if we eliminate cyclists going against the flow of traffic and we eliminate overtaking crashes, and just focus on those dominant motorist-caused turning and crossing movement types of crashes, the right hook, the left cross, and the drive out, what we see is that sidewalk riders actually have the lowest risk. That's because they're slower. So notice as chart moves up from down low on the right up to the top on the left, that the cyclist speed is basically increasing by about 50% while their risk is doubling. And that's because the cyclist needs more stopping distance if a motorist violates their right of way at an intersection or a drive. And we had kind of a natural experiment that I stumbled upon when we were doing a study of the Silver Star Road corridor in our area. And I noticed that there was a lot of right hook crashes involving sidewalk riders. Well, having discovered that risk for that crash was actually very low, it's like, why is it happening? Well, Silver Star is unique in our area and much of Florida and having hills. And sure enough, where I looked at where the right hook crashes were happening, most of them were on downhill stretches. The cyclist was coming downhill at that point of impact. So I did the counts, the video to look at the speeds, and what we found was that the cyclists were going about 30% faster, but their right hook crash risk went up by 1,400%, and their overall crash risk for going with the flow of traffic went up by 600%, just with a 30% increase in speed. And that's comparing to other similar 6-lane commercial arterials. So that's without motors. That's just with downhill. And now we have cyclists who are capable of these kinds of speeds everywhere. And most of them are sticking to the sidewalks, which is where they were riding before. And we're seeing that in the crash data now. We've had some preliminary data. We're looking in detail to discern the difference between regular bikes and e-bikes and e-scooters. Regular bikes have about 7% of their crashes are right hook crashes, while e-bikes it's 11%. So we can't do a risk analysis because we don't have a split as far as the mode, how many of each, but it's clear that that's a significant difference. So how do we adapt? There are a number of different ways. We have to look at the policy side. We're seeing jurisdictions throughout our area, throughout the state, throughout the country, setting their own e-bike rules. There's really no national level standards. E-bikes are not treated by the federal government as motor vehicles. They're treated as consumer products. And so it's really left up to the states to determine how these vehicles function. The folks at the People for Bikes had developed a model legislation, what they show as model, shown here in green, acceptable ones, not are in orange. And then with the one state there, Alaska, they consider it to be problematic. But Alaska is actually kind of where everyone else is talking about going, which is putting some restrictions on the class 3 and perhaps the class 2 to require licensing or to prohibit them from sidewalk use. So I think having more data will help us to make a better decision about how this moves forward. We have the regulatory structure, or statutorily, again, e-bike riders have the same rights and duties as other bicyclists, vehicle drivers. Because we don't have the federal oversight, it makes it really difficult for enforcement because we don't have consistent labeling. How is an officer to know if it's a class 1, 2, or 3? I mean, some of the manufacturers are good about labeling, others not so much. There's also the concern, of course, about battery safety. Some bigger cities, New York City most notably, being concerned about fires. Hopefully this will decrease as battery technology improves. But in the meantime, it's something that denser areas that have more fire concerns are taking action. And again, just limited consumer awareness, both as to the nature of these vehicles, how they can be used, and who can use them. So we had the recent law, Nathan mentioned this, requiring micromobility users to yield pedestrians, which is already in there for regular bicyclists. Going less than 10 miles per hour if they're within 50 feet of pedestrian. I think that's problematic from an enforcement standpoint. I think that's been expressed a lot. Now, having a state task force, hopefully to gather more data and move forward with a little more information and clarity. Hopefully we'll see that. They're looking for conclusions from that task force in October of this year. The Signal 4 system is in the process of updating their system to track e-bikes and e-scooters. They're actually using AI to read the narratives of the crash reports because there's no specific place in the crash report for officers to report what type of e-micromobility device it is. We have to rely on just their writings. There have been a number of local jurisdictions that are doing similar work. A lot of it is duplicative of what's happening at the state level, but others are talking about age restrictions, limitations on use of shared use paths, requiring IDs, setting local fines. Here in Orange County, there's been a lot of concern about reckless activity and talking about potential impound. And some of the jurisdictions also bringing the parents into the mix, right? Holding them accountable for the behaviors of minors with these devices. And of course, it goes beyond just, as there's more than just the e-bikes themselves, but also the e-motos. And that, one example here from Orange County, based on feedback from the sheriff's office and a consideration that's recently discussed. When we get into policy options, there's the issue of the classes, the types of e-bikes, but again, it's really hard when we don't have federal guidance from the top. Standardizing crash reporting. This is something that will happen here in Florida as when the new crash report is completed later this decade. Context-sensitive speed caps. Carol alluded to that. That's something really that can happen more on the fleet side of things, where you have the geo-fencing capability. Minimum age requirements still remains to be seen where that goes. And the fleet provider, again, back to what Carol had discussed in her presentation. And then from a programs standpoint, how do we adapt? Well, we have a number of different planning documents that we work with, right? We have our active transportation plans, but then local governments may have electrification plans, although I don't think e-mobility is really that big of an impact from an electricity standpoint. Curbside management, as to parking for these devices, environmental plans. What do we do with the old batteries, making sure that they're disposed of properly? And then just part of our general mobility planning for, reducing our reliance on single occupant motor vehicles. Number of agencies, FDOT in particular, launching safety campaigns, as has been discussed, belabor that. One of the things that we are doing at Metroplan Orlando is we're piloting an existing online e-bike course that is geared for teenagers. It has an hour's worth of video material, as well as some quizzes. And this is developed by American Bicycling Education Association. And we're trying to run this through the schools to pilot it and do a little bit of pre and post course survey. A lot of bureaucratic challenges we've had on that, but we hope to have some results on that. And ultimately, this is the sort of thing that the schools can do. They could actually host this course and make it a requirement for students who want to bring their e-bike or e-scooter on campus. That makes it really easy for the kids to simply log into an online course, complete it, finish their quiz, print out or email a certificate, and then the school can give them a tag for their bike to ensure that they've completed that so they can ride their bike to campus. Some other options are looking at first defense, safety courses. It's been tried with regular bicycle crashes or bicycle infractions in the past. The illegal battery replacement, again, that gets more to the big urban areas where there's the fire concern. That may be an issue in some parts of Florida. And then lastly, of course, there's infrastructure. Some of the considerations of our white paper were, widening or adding bike lanes or widening the existing bike lanes. But it's important to understand that overtaking crashes are only about 5% of bicycle crashes. It's even less for e-bikes. And so passing clearance, while it's nice, it's not necessarily the big issue with crashes. It's really the turning and crossing movements. Daylighting intersections can help for sight lines, again, which is also related to speed. But many of the crashes I see have actually very good visibility, and it's just a function of, human beings make mistakes. We misjudge the speed of approaching bicyclists. And so if they're going fast, they need a lot of stopping distance. There's the option of the protected corner design, which works where you can implement it. But what I find in the crash data is that less than a third of bike crashes happen at major intersections like this. The other remaining crashes are happening at commercial driveways and minor cross streets where you're not going to be able to implement these types of strategies. There's the approach of self-enforcing strategies. How can we get these users to ride more slowly in mixed environments where they're interacting with pedestrians? With road markings and signage, we may be able to encourage them to use the roadway rather than using the sidewalk, depending on context. And then lastly, I want to mention something that we've been tracking a new project. As I mentioned, we've been doing video counts, and we have extensive, very detailed crash data that we can tie together to look at risk levels. And FDOT put in a separated bike lane along a 2-mile stretch of State Road 436. Prior to that facility, it had a paved shoulder. And for the 9 years prior, looking at the crash data, there were 17 crashes, so about 2 per year. 3 of those were serious. And so we did a pre-construction bike count. You see 166 bikes in a 48-hour period. Since the beginning of 2025, so 15 months, there have actually been 13 crashes, which is about 10 crashes per year. Nearly half of those were e-bike riders. And when I've been out there deploying the cameras, they are really zipping along much faster than you would have seen a regular cyclist on the sidewalk. Now, there has been an increase in bikes overall, but it's about 35%. So we're seeing a 5-fold increase in crashes since the installation of this. It's not that I really attribute it to the facility itself, but it corresponded to this big increase in e-bikes. And I think what this tells us too is rather than get into a debate as to the effectiveness of a facility like this, my contention is that irrespective of what we build, these users need to be trained. The faster you're going, the more important it is for these users to have training so that they can avoid crashes with motor vehicles, as well as their solo crashes and injuries as well. That concludes my part of the presentation. And I guess we're off to our final Q&A.
Thank you, Mike. And Carol can jump back in with us so we can facilitate Q&A. We had a couple questions come in. I know we're just about up on time, so we hope that you can stick around for a few minutes if we do run over, but we're happy to take questions if anybody wants to raise their hand and speak. And then we did have a couple questions come up from Tom on largely legal issues. I want to just mention one of the items because this does cross over between the two presentations, the golf cart LSV and talk a little bit about e-bikes. So graphic as a sample of the golf cart LSV graphic that shows categories and limitations of e-bikes and electric motorcycles would be great for education. And also perhaps Florida should require conspicuous labels of what the devices are to aid enforcement. I did clarify in my response to that comment that Florida Statute 316.20655, paragraph 3 does have the requirement that devices be labeled. But as I alluded to, that is what's legally classified as e-bikes. So that is a limitation in the current law that could hopefully be addressed as the legislature looks to improve those laws and expand the definitions of potential devices. So just wanted to mention that for everybody, that is a requirement, but it will only address e-bikes.
I'd also
Tom,
mention
go ahead.
that in addition to that, frequently when we discuss the issues of the micromobility devices, e-bicycles, they are frequently marketed as legal under these classification systems, but then there are now bypass, governors that allow either electronic or a switch, which would modify the bicycle, and they don't have the correct classification system once that has happened. So that is another issue that has been presented locally from our law enforcement side. That is clearly an issue. And I think, the second comment for Tom was that 28 miles per hour sidewalk is too fast. Sidewalks are designed for pedestrians. So, when you think about that user is 3 miles per hour, when you have these vehicles that are operated at a much higher speed, there's potential for conflict, as Mike alluded to in his slides. And separating speeds, conflicts at points in time and space is critical. So thank you, Tom, for that commentary and those questions. And we also had an additional question from Catherine Wall. Any recommendations, so for the panelists, any recommendations on how to increase awareness for parents and care? Excuse me, I'm reading the wrong one. Let me scroll to the bottom. Thank you. Plans for requiring helmet use or monitor the use of helmets while on these devices. So Mike, how has that gone for you all in Orlando? And then Carol, how do you all encourage that as a micromobility provider in some of your markets?
Well, I guess I'll start. We've really been trying to focus more on the broader education of, what are the skills and strategies that you need to stay out of a crash. Whereas the helmet prevents your injury if you get in a crash. I like to look at the 5 layers of safety, and the helmet is actually the last layer. Controlling your bike, following the rules, defensive driving, all those things can do much more to reduce injuries.
Yeah, we use a combination of tools. So even before the start of a ride, we go through what is considered sort of like the preparation stage for the rider, where we go over rules of the road, like tips on safe riding, recommendations on helmet use. We try and leverage technology to encourage helmet use. So we have a helmet selfie and provides a financial incentive for folks to bring their own helmet and wear it during a trip. We do what we call First Ride Academy programming. So we're out and about in the community, in the cities we partner with, and we're doing e-bike lessons, like how to actually engage an e-bike if you're not familiar, how to engage an e-scooter if you've never ridden one. And again, we do a ton of education, but also we give away helmets all the time. We know that people do not want to share a helmet, so we don't have those on the vehicles, but we do try and make them as available as possible for folks.
And before you jump to the next question, Brian, I've found that first of all, helmets are not required in the state of Florida. You're not required to wear a helmet when you ride a motorcycle, which is a much faster and more powerful vehicle. There are requirements for youth to wear helmets. So that's, one of the limitations we have is just a preemption that you can't add an additional criteria at the local level. But one of the things that I learned about e-bikes, especially as we start talking about class 3, the more capable e-bikes, is that there is a standard for more capable, a higher speed rated helmet to wear. It's the Dutch standard NTA 8776, which I think from an encouragement perspective is a real missed opportunity. A lot of folks are not even aware that there is a specially designed helmet that if you are involved in a crash will provide a higher level of protection if you are riding an e-bike or a faster device. And so that's really an opportunity for us as professionals to get the word out. Hey, these are the types of helmets you should be wearing if you are riding these higher speed e-bikes. And they'll provide you a higher level of protection if, God forbid, you are involved in a crash. But a lot of folks just aren't aware of that. I was a professional working in a city when I learned that. So that's news that we need to get out a little bit more broadly, and it's an international standard. So hopefully we here in North America can adopt a similar criteria in the near future.
And we've been trying to work with our Florida Pedestrian Bicycle Resource Center to get helmets updated to a higher standard. Because currently the ones that are provided are only rated for crashes up to 12 miles per hour. So all the helmets that we're giving away, if there's a huge change in the marketplace that dictates that we're going to be going faster than 12, maybe it's a 15 mile per hour e-scooter that's given to a youth, or a no more than 20 mile per hour device, those helmets should probably be ready for that. Now, I did want to ask the question to Carol about kind of how the changing dynamics of the market and micromobility providers are also responding, because we see that the cost of these things have gone down substantially. And I say these things, I mean e-scooters, e-bicycles. Have communities really shied away from providing shared bicycles, shared scooter fleets, or is that still an important part of mobility toolboxes in communities, or has the private acquisition of this kind of squandered that market? What does that look like in Florida?
That's a great question. I actually think it's the opposite. I think because there's growing use in the private sector, it's actually almost brought to the forefront, like the importance of having shared fleets that are available. So cities are seeing the value in having a shared fleet where things like geofencing are available, and we can create slow speed zones. We can create no operational zones. We can create no parking zones and have a lot more sort of governance of where these devices are allowed to go and at what speed, and just really kind of craft and tailor the program with safety in mind for riders and pedestrians. So I would say, I think we're seeing maybe the opposite effect, where I think the significance and relevance and importance of having that shared fleet is becoming much more pronounced, just given like all the added value adds that come with the ability to regulate the program.
Thank you. Well, one more quick question in from Mr. Pete Burr. Any update on the Palm Beach County ordinance and how it will be enforced countywide? So for those on the call who maybe have not heard, there is currently a draft underway. So back at that policy slide that Nathan kicked us off with, that has to do with the state implementing some laws in Florida. There is also a counter part to that in the local criminal justice commission that's being developed currently. So we as a county are currently, I guess, looking at this ordinance as a means to help close some of those gaps that maybe were initially in the bill that was passed by the legislature. That has to do with the use of electric bicycles, use of e-scooters, helmet requirements, speeds, and operating on sidewalks and other locations. So that we do have a draft of that. We would ask that any questions related to that are forwarded to the CJC in Palm Beach County. They are taking the lead on developing it. I understand that their intention is to adopt that ordinance either in August or September. So that is the update that we have there. We do have a copy of that. If anybody would like to reach out, we can put you in touch with Dawn and Taruna at the CJC to put them into the right place. So Johnny Tisch, council member from Village of Palm Springs, is on, and he asked, how about 2 or more on one bike? So I'm gonna answer this from, I think, the statewide perspective and the statewide rules, but I'm also gonna ask Carol if to start on this, because I want to know if the Lime has a rule against one or two people on their bikes, or if they have dual seated bicycles.
Yeah, we make it very clear at all sort of stages that it's one person per device, but we understand that there might be some situations where having a passenger is appropriate. We have heard from the disability community that in instances where someone maybe has a visual impairment, it would be great to be able to have a pilot. And so with that sort of feedback in mind, we are developing a second seater option. And so the way that it works with our Lime Glider and our Lime Bike, which are new generation seated vehicles, it's an optional attachment that goes in the back. And so we have the ability to either retrofit those vehicles to have a cargo attachment and just increase the sort of capability of that vehicle to be used for groceries or to run errands, or we can do the passenger attachment and make that a 2-passenger modality.
Thank you. Well, I'll just say that there are rules and regulations already in place at the state level related to the number of seats provided on a bicycle. So frequently, you'll see a bicycle modified, a conventional bicycle that has sometimes pegs that come off the rear hub that allow people to stand. Those are not permissible for 2 riders. What is permissible is if you have a rack and a designated seat for someone to sit. So you'll frequently see either 2 people on an e-kick scooter or two people riding on an electric bicycle. I think I saw the term pocket bicycle, which I really like. They might just be riding on the handlebars, and that is also not permissible under Florida law, and it's an offense that you can cite for. So, Mike, I'm curious, is that part of your cycling savvy education? How do you handle that in your curriculum?
No, it's not anything that we've handled with Cycling Savvy. Cycling Savvy is geared more toward adult riders. I think most of them have gone. People who are taking Cycling Savvy are we're not having that issue with them. But certainly for kids, and the teen e-bike program does address that kids should only be carrying a passenger if their e-bike is actually equipped for doing so.
Thank you very much. I'm curious, Margie, Angela, or anybody else, closing thoughts on this before we wrap up? We're about 5 minutes over. So I think
Nothing for me, but thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
And as I mentioned before, the slides will be posted online, and thank you all for participating this morning. Please reach out if you have any questions, answers, or burning questions, or if you want to learn more about getting engaged with the MPO, either here locally in Palm Beach, MetroPlan Orlando, of course, and then thank you to our state partners with the Safe Mobility for Life Coalition and Lime for presenting as well. With that, everyone, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.